In this video, I'm going to show you how to take some of the stock sounds from Lethal and take them just a bit further, add a little bit more weirdness, a little bit more textural quality to our track. And this is really my favorite part. So let's get started. So when I was deep in the rabbit hole of making the pad sounds, I came up with this little MIDI clip that I have here. And now I'm just going to try some different sounds with it and see, where we can take it, what kind of interesting sound design stuff we can do with it. So we've all right, so that's kind of interesting. There's something I want to do with this ARP thing where it kind of feels like strumming a chord. So let's give this a try here. Yeah, something like that. We can add a bit of detune. Some stereo width, nice and wide. Ooh, yeah, that's nice. Maybe a bit more on the release to kind of make it a bit more flowy. Pulling a bit of the filter down. Let's grab a bit of this stuff here and just layer it under this thing to see what it sounds like. Okay, so now we've got this sort of sound, kind of interesting. I kind of want to see what else I can do with it. First, let's just put maybe a bit more reverb on here. Let's also drop a delay on here. Something like that seems about right. Now I just wanted to play with some effects. In Ableton, under the multi-band dynamics, there's this preset called OTT. And basically what it does is it kind of just flattens your sound on the 3 separate bands. So the tails of sounds last for a really long time, and you can get these really kind of weird artifacts that come out of this thing. I just adjusted the output gain a little bit so that we get this, so it's a little bit more shaped the way that I want it. The other thing that I'll do on here, I want it to sound a little bit distorted, but not too much. I really like this vinyl distortion. Sometimes you got to be a bit careful with it, but sometimes it can add just this real nice grit to it. Yeah, something kind of like that, I think feels nice. Just a bit of extra grit in there, and then we'll do kind of the same thing that we did before with the grain delay. One of the things that's really nice about adding this sort of grain delay on here is I don't want the notes in these chords to sound like individual chords. I want them to sort of like bloom, like just be like, the grain delay kind of lets you do that sort of thing sometimes. So you get less of the attacks of the notes, even though I still want the kind of attacky notes, but I want them to sort of come out a little bit later. So that's what I'm sort of trying to engineer in here. Actually, on that note, we might try doing something like this. Bring the low, or this guy, sorry. Something like that, a little something like that. That seems pretty good. Whenever I start messing around with the distortion, sometimes I like to add a little bit of this kind of speaker feel, because it's sort of like, if we're gonna have it sound dirty, then it's usually nice to, make it sound like it's coming out of something. So sometimes I just add a little bit of this. And it also emphasizes the mids a bit more if you have the dry wet not fully up. And what I'm gonna do with the EQ here is I'm gonna take out all the lows. I might put this one, something like that. And I'm just gonna kind of emphasize the mids here. And we'll sort of see where that takes us. Yeah, that's starting to really kind of feel nice. Just one last layer of reverb just to blur it out even a tiny bit more. Yeah. It's a bit too boomy. I think that ought to do it. So we got something like that. So after you do all that, you can just freeze it, and we're gonna flatten it. And what you'll come up with when it's done freezing is something like this. So say we mute this guy. Let's try, I like this chord progression, but I think if I take, for example, if I take this whole thing and I reverse this, there's definitely something interesting about that. We could even, you know, say pitch it up, like maybe we don't want it to be filling up the whole, you know, the mid or the mids or the low mids or whatever. So we can get this kind of icy feeling out of it if we do this. And this grain size is going to help to just make it feel a little bit more interesting. That being said, this, because I wrote this chord progression the other direction, I think that this won't sound all that great. So what I like to do is just go in here and chop it up so that each chord is separate. And we'll just go through and reverse each one. So what we end up with is something like this. That feels a little bit more interesting and on point. From there we can do, you know, maybe add a little bit of reverb to that, and maybe add a little bit of this grain delay, expanding sort of thing, you know, just for fun. We can also do another thing with the grain delay, which I quite like doing, where we pitch it down an octave. So let's go -12. Here, and we can actually put that on its own separate group. So here we have our dry chain. This is going to be our pitch down by 12 semitones chain. And then here we can kind of, you know, for example, warm that up with a bit of saturation just for that one chain. It's a nice full sound. Now, what I also wanted to add kind of closer to the beginning of the track here is this part here feels a bit empty. So what I want to do is I'm going to grab these two chords, these two first chords. I'm going to drop them on a new track. I'm going to consolidate this, stretch them out, and let's pitch them up like a fair bit. The way this beats mode works, as you probably know, is that if it's set to 16th notes, for example, it's going to start playing the sample again every 16th note. And if it's set to this once forward mode, it's going to just play that chunk forward without stretching it or anything, right? So you get this sort of cha-cha-cha-cha-cha sort of thing. If you have it on this one, then you get this stretched out sort of sound. This one forward and backward. So it's a type of granular resynthesis, so it's a way of like filling in the gaps, right? So what we're telling it to do is don't fill in the gaps. And if you set it to transients mode, then it's just going to play it every time there's a warp marker. So warp marker or this kind of transient thing. So what we can do is if we give this the swing, and then we start doing something like this, then we can start kind of making our own little rhythm, and this will sound a little bit more like a bell or something like that, more of a percussive element, right? All right, so now that we've kind of added all our little warp markers in there, then we get this sort of rhythm like this. I kind of messed with the pitch a little bit too, so it sounds a little bit different, but you get the general idea. Right, so, and now with that, there's a couple things I really like to do. One is just to put a bit of a amp sort of feel on there, give it a bit of a speaker. Just kind of brighten it up a little bit. That actually might be nice too. Not too crazy, but just a little bit. And then we'll cut out the lows. We'll cut out the highs. And I'm gonna do a little thing that I like here. I'm gonna put a reverb before this. I want this envelope to be controlled by this sound, but I want it to be controlled by the sound that happens before the reverb. So what you can do is if you hit sidechain and then you go to your pad bell, this is gonna be sidechained to the sound before all these effects. So you can hear how we get some of the nice stuff that happens from the reverb, but we have this sort of a little bit more control on the sound. We can give it a little bit more definition that way. At this point, we're sort of just fluffing it up, making it sound good. I feel like it's still maybe a bit too thick in the mix, so let's add a phaser in there. Nothing too complicated here. I'm just kind of playing around a little bit. Great, that sounds kind of cool. I want to kind of bring out some of the sounds that I feel like are getting a little bit lost in there. This car stereo thing gives it kind of an interesting sound. So you can hear how it really kind of brings out those highs again. Let's play around with that a bit. Perfect. So now the only thing I want to do is add auto filter on the end of that, and I'm just going to bring it in slowly. So we can do this, start our auto filter down here, and then kind of just slowly bring it up. And that'll give us kind of this nice percussive sound that came from the chords from earlier. Sweet, so now we're pretty much done. I just wanted to add one last thing, and that's a vocal layer. That's gonna really give it that human touch. Check that out in the next video.